trim our cake plate today and assemble the stand and the top together. So things that you'll need for this part of your project are a bucket of water, a sponge. This sponge helps to clean your tools off as you go along. You'll need some bats. You'll need a brush for your slip. I do just use water for slip, but if you have a small container of your own clay body with a little bit of slip and vinegar, that's fine too. Any of those things work. A trimming tool. I'm not actually going to trim a lot of the top, just a little bit of the side, because the top is a little too thin to trim. It's just the right thickness now. If I trimmed it, it'd be too thin and slump in the kiln, or crack possibly. We've got a couple ribs. These are finishing ribs. They're very soft mud tool ribs. A sponge in case you need it. And you'll need some sort of scoring implement. So if you don't want to purchase a scoring tool like this here, needle tools to make hatch marks work just fine. And then the last thing that you're going to need is a fettling knife or a butter knife, and this is going to help you cut the stand off of the bat, because the stand has probably re-adhered itself to that bat, and if you undercut it with a cut wire, it can tend to alter the shape of it. So these fettling knives or butter knives are the best thing for that. You will, in addition, have to recut the top off of the bat as well. These things re-adhere themselves, so you will need your cut wire near you. In addition to that, I highly recommend that you put this back on the wheel head on the bat pins so that you've got that leverage to pull against the toggles and you don't undercut too much of this off. So I have a clean bat here to work on. I have already re-undercut this, so I set this down on my bat on the wheel head, and I took my cut wire and recut, holding the toggles down and keeping my hands below the project. This also, I should mention how dry this is. This has been drying for a little while. If you are throwing this and hoping to trim it in the next week, you may not be able to in the 2 hours. What I would recommend is when you come in, you have a hand building project or another project on the wheel in mind for the second week after you throw the plate. Uncover the plate while you're working on your other project and then recover it and do this in the third week, because these plates tend to take a really long time to dry, and if you try to assemble this when it's not the right stage of leather hard, it's gonna crack. So you can see that I can hold this in my hand and there's no bowing. This is like a nice, good leather hard clay. Or you all know I love to talk about cheese. One of my favorite things, so good Romano cheese or Manchego, so good. So we're gonna set this up, and basically I'm just recentering it to smooth out these cut wire marks, and then also I wanna get rid of this sharp edge here that's a little unrefined right now. So I'm gonna recenter this. I don't like to tap these large flat things to center because I feel like it's too much strain on the surface there. So I just kind of eyeball it and use my needle tool to get me close to the center. And what I'm looking at is the distance between the line I draw and the edge of the thing I'm trimming for these plates here. And I want the same width all the way around. If you've got a really wide side and a really skinny side, that means that you are going to have to move that in the direction of your skinny side until you've got the same width of your circle all the way around. This looks pretty good, so we'll lock this down with some soft worms. Make sure when you're locking down with your worms that you're holding the pot still, the plate, the pot, the stand, whatever it is you're working on. All right, so then we're gonna just trim up the side here first, and all I'm doing is just taking the sharp edge off. So I've got this tool straight up and down, this part of the tool straight up and down and tipped away from me just a little bit. And then also I'm holding this in the palm of my hand with my finger to the neck for the most support I can have and control. Turn your wheel on slow and then touch your pot. Try not to start with the tool on the pot. And that is pretty much all I'm gonna do. Now I'm gonna take my rib, and this may take a minute because it is a little bit more to the dry leather hard stage, but I'm gonna take my rib and smooth the top. So I've got the flat side of my rib on the pot and tipped away from me, not straight on. See how it chatters? You don't want that, so tip it away from you a little bit. All right, so once you've got that trimmed, you're gonna flip it over. Make sure you're working on a clean surface. Little things like dry clay on what you're working on can leave marks on the top. And this is how this stand is going to dry. You have to let it dry flat. If you were to flip it over and dry it on its stand, it would slump because of the pressure of this as it's drying on something that's like propping it up. So definitely that's how we fire it on the first go. We fire these things upside down and we let them dry that way too. Nice and slow is the way to go. All right, so we've got our stand. Remember that we threw this upside down, so this will actually get shifted as you see it onto the bottom inside of your cake platter there. But we've got to cut this off. So when you're cutting off round things with no floors, remember we threw this without a floor there. The best tool to use is a fettling knife. If you don't have one of these, a butter knife from your kitchen will work just fine. And you're gonna insert that in the bottom and then you just spin the wheel. These wheels work as banding wheels. Just don't spin them against the way the motor's turning. What I mean by that is if you have your wheel, especially these Pacificas that go two directions, counterclockwise and counterclockwise, if you have your wheel spinning counterclockwise because you're throwing right-handed, don't spin it clockwise. You're fighting the motor and it's not good for the wheel. So please go in the direction that you've got that wheel set. So I'm spinning this, and then when I get to the edge of where I started, I'm holding this so that it doesn't move, and then just wiggle it the rest of the way around. All right, So you've got that cut off now. You'll notice too that I didn't cut away this interior. It's got like a nice swoop on the inside from the way that we threw it. That's good. I can use that as part of the bevel that goes towards the plate. A little more surface area to attach is what I mean. So we're gonna bring this back to us. We'll set that stand down for a second. Okay, put this back on the wheel and we're gonna center this. So again, same thing. I'm not comfortable tapping big plates to center because of the stress it'll put on the form and likelihood of cracks. So I'm gonna just guesstimate with a needle tool and get it as close as I can. Now we're going to take a look at this and see how close to center we can get it. And I'm using the line that I drew to center the top of the stand to guess about approximately where this is. So I'm looking at the distance between this and the line I drew. You will also be able to see it if you turn the wheel on and it's off. I mean, you can see that. That's pretty obvious to everyone, I think. So get it as close to center as you can. That looks pretty good to me. So I'm going to erase the line that I drew to center the top of the stand with my finger, and I'm going to draw two lines. I'm drawing a line on the exterior where this meets this, and an interior where the floor is. And I'll show you. That looks like that. So that is where the stand is going to sit on the plate, and that is where you score. So now you take your scoring tool, and when you're scoring, you want to make your score marks matter. So no weak little marks, nothing like this, right? That will not stay adhered. Nothing like that. Little tiny light score marks. Really dig in. Do you see the difference there? That is what's going to make this stick to this. So it's not slip magic, it's the magic of your connections. You need a good zipper. As Rhonda, my good friend Rhonda calls it, a good clay high five. If you're using this as your score mark, it's just you make a lot of lines and then you cross hatch them the opposite direction. So lines and then cross hatch. Either way works. Just make sure that those marks give your pot and your stand something to connect each other to. And then we're going to put some slip on there. So I'm just using a little water here today. And again, if you've got a magic slip that you swear by, that's fine. Water works just fine for me. And I think as long as you get those connections scored real well, you'll be just fine. All right, and then moment of truth. You connect that down and give it a little wiggle. Give it a little spin to make sure it's still fairly centered. And then I'm going to give it some seam reinforcements with coils on the inside and the outside. So I'm going to take my tool and I'm going to score where those coils go. And then we get a little bit of soft clay. I usually will make these pretty skinny, and I usually don't coil more than I can hold in one hand because they'll get dry really fast. So I'm going to score the coil, but I'm not going to put any water on it so that it doesn't fall apart in my hand. And how I work these into any edge is, I'll show you on the side here. I hold it in my hand and then I'll take with my index finger and I'll push as I go along. And it kind of works the coil into whatever seam you're trying to reinforce. The difference between doing that and just setting your coil against the seam, if you can see that, it's just a big snake of clay there, is that this is a lot harder to clean up in the end than the former would have been. So, give that a little try. I do put a little more slip on the pot, and I'll show you the interior of this as I go, before I go any further, so that you can see. So you can see here, this was the side, that's where I scored. And you can see where I'm working that coil around as I go. And then that will be the same here. You can see where I scored, and I'm going to work a coil there as well. And that will help, as it dries, reinforce those seams, keep them together. Okay, so now we're just going to take our rib and smooth those coils in. All right, so you're going to set this with a piece of newspaper laid loose across the top. You can ask your instructor for the newspaper, since we won't have them for people to rifle through because of the COVID pandemic. And then please take and put your bat in the vat of disinfectant that we have available for you. So give it a quick wash and throw it in that vat of bleach so that we can disinfect those for the people coming in behind you. Thanks so much for watching and have a great day. Great job.